Um, I want to remind you that we're having a meeting on propositions at 7 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday, October 7th, and which is in time because the ballots are mailed October 5th. We will talk about all the propositions, but also explain some of the more controversial ones that are hard to figure out, like Proposition 24. It's going to be a great meeting. Please come. You know, we have a big presidential election this year. If you would like Biden-Harris yard signs or window signs, Vice President Richard Adler will update us. Thank you, Richard.
You are welcome. Yes, I do have a lot of signs in my garage that for all the people that want Biden-Harris lawn signs, which are $5, and I've been told they may go up in price. So get them while they're hot. And also, I have the Biden-Harris window signs, which are free. And I also have some buttons and bumper stickers. I'm going to be at the Danville Farmers Market on Saturday about 9 o'clock. So people that want to get signs that don't want to come to my place can come to the Danville Farmers Market. But let me know if you want signs. I guess you could let Brody know, or you can contact me directly.
Why don't you put your email in the chat?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. And I'll put my email in my address in the chat, so you know how to call me and to visit me. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I'll be able to get signs if they run out. I have a good source of signs in Concord, and I'll get them. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Now, the yard signs are, oh, we have someone on the telephone. Let me mute them. Thank you. Okay. Tell them about the yard signs are the plastic kind, but they still look great, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they will hold up better with rain as well. So I've been told that they may be affected by the wind a little bit, so you may have to staple the bottom, but actually nobody that I've given signs to has complained about it. But I actually think they're better because they are waterproof.
Great. Okay, thank you, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
Now for the Zoom experience, to make this the best, be in the speaker mode. That way you can see the speaker in the middle of your screen. If you see a gallery of people in the middle of your screen, go to the top right-hand corner and click on speaker, okay? And of course, it's good Zoom etiquette is always to keep yourself muted. Go to the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a microphone. There should be a line through it, meaning that you're muted. So please stay muted, thank you. And now we're honored to have Professor Chemerinsky speak to us today. He is the Dean of the UC Berkeley Law School. Prior to that, he was the founder and Dean of the UC Irvine Law School. He has written numerous books. His most recent is We the People, a progressive reading of the Constitution for the 21st century. He's also written books on free speech, and he has a YouTube video on free speech and many others, including a YouTube video moderating conversations about the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what may follow. Professor Chemerinsky is renowned. He's an expert on the Constitution. The title of his talk today is Recent Supreme Court Decisions. Thank you, Professor Chemerinsky, for joining us.
It's my pleasure. How long would you like me to speak, and how much time do you want me to leave for questions?
You can speak as long as you want. You know, you can speak 40 minutes, 50 minutes.
30 minutes. How about 30 minutes I'll talk and then take 20 minutes of questions?
Okay.
It's wonderful to be with you. When I had agreed to do this, my primary focus was going to be on what the Supreme Court did last year, and then talk a little bit about what the Supreme Court has on the docket for the coming year. Obviously, everything changed with the Supreme Court and changed dramatically last Friday when Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away at age 87. So I want to focus my remarks today on the current and likely future court and what's it going to mean. And as I go along, I'll talk about key decisions from last term, but I really do think at this moment in time, I want to focus on three questions. First, how did we get here? Second, what will it mean to have a very conservative court for decades to come? And third, what, if anything, can the Democrats do about it? Let me start with the how do we get here. If I would have spoken to you a week ago today, I would have said we have a Supreme Court with 4 very conservative justices, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. 1 moderate conservative justice, John Roberts. To be sure, he's right of center, votes with the conservatives more often than not, but sometimes would join with the liberal justices. And then 4 liberal justices, 2 more moderate liberals, Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan, and 2 very liberal justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor. And as a result, what would mean last year in the Supreme Court was when the justices were split 5-4, more often than not, the conservative position would prevail, but not always. So last year, there were 14 5-4 decisions out of 53 cases. Now, by the way, that's really extraordinary. 53 cases decided in a year is the fewest number since 1862. But given the direction of the Supreme Court, the less they decide, maybe the better. Of those 14 5-4 decisions, in 10 of them, the majority was Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. In 2 of the 14, the majority was Roberts, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. So if you want to get a picture of where Roberts is ideologically, that statistic gives it to you. But there were a couple of cases where Roberts joined with the liberals. One of them was a very important decision concerning DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. President Obama created DACA. These are the so-called dreamers. It applies to those who were brought to the United States, be it unlawfully, before the age of 15. To qualify for DACA status, a person has to be either enrolled in school or successfully graduated, in the military, or honorably discharged. Person who gets DACA status gets deferred deportation status for 2 years, meaning the individual can't be deported from the United States for that period, and gets a work permit. It's estimated there's 800,000 individuals who benefit from DACA. Many on my campus, some in my law school. President Trump rescinded DACA. Several federal courts said that this was impermissible. They said it violated a federal law called the Administrative Procedures Act that says that administrative actions of the government can't be arbitrary or capricious or unreasonable. The Supreme Court 5-4 ruled against President Trump. Chief Justice Roberts wrote for the court, joined by Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. He said there has to be an articulate, legitimate reason for the government's action. The government had no reason for doing this. The president should have considered the tremendous reliance there had been on DACA. The president didn't consider that. He said if the concern was giving these individuals work permits, why not just take that away? Why take away the protection from deportation? The other case where Roberts joined with Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan to create the majority was a case that involved abortion. And the case was called June Medical Services versus Russo. Louisiana adopted a law that said, in order for a woman to receive an abortion, the doctor performing it has to have admitting privilege to the hospital within 30 miles. And the hospitals won't give these doctors admitting privileges. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it's because in 2016, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional an identical Texas law. Texas had the same provision, and the Supreme Court 5-3 said the Texas law was an unconstitutional, undue burden on a woman's right to abortion. Justice Breyer wrote for the court, joined by Justice Kennedy and Justices Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan. Justice Breyer said, the court should decide what's an undue burden by weighing the burden on access to abortion against the benefit to women's health and regulation. He said, this regulation would create an enormous burden on access to abortion. It would close most of the facilities in Texas where abortion performed, but it would do nothing to protect women's health. He said, rarely do women having abortions need to be hospitalized. And if they do, the doctors at those hospitals will provide treatment. The Louisiana law was identical to the Texas statute that had been struck down in Whole Women's Health. In fact, Louisiana simply copied the Texas law. The question was Louisiana law constitutional? Remember, Justice Kennedy had been in the majority in the 2016 decision, and he's no longer on the court. Would there be 5 justices without him? Justice Alito and Roberts and Thomas had dissented in that 2016 case. Well, to everyone's surprise, the court 5-4 ruled to strike down the Louisiana statute. Breyer wrote for 4 justices and said, just as he did in 2016, this law substantially impedes access to abortion without doing anything to protect women's health. It's an undue burden on a woman's right to abortion. Chief Justice Roberts was the 5th vote for the majority. He said, I dissented in Whole Women's Health. I thought it was wrong then, I thought it's wrong now. But he said, precedent matters in this court, and we have to follow precedent, especially a recent precedent like this. So those are 2 instances where Roberts joined with the liberals to come to a conclusion that the other conservative justices rejected. There are more examples. In 2019, in Department of Commerce versus New York, Chief Justice Roberts joined with the 4 liberal justices to say that President Trump could not add a question about citizenship to the 2020 census. Chief Justice Roberts said there's no legitimate reason for doing this. Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh dissented. In 2012, when the Supreme Court upheld the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, it was 5-4, with Roberts joined by Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. Now, I don't want to overstate this. Much more often than not, when the court's been 5-4, Roberts has been with the conservatives and the liberals. But at least Roberts has been in play in some of these cases. He was the swing justice. With Ruth Bader Ginsburg being replaced by somebody who's from the far right of the ideological spectrum, there'll be 5 very conservative justices. Now, the names most frequently mentioned are Amy Coney Barrett, a federal court of appeals judge in Chicago. She's a former Justice Scalia clerk, and there is no one more conservative on the federal court of appeals in the United States today. She was very critical of the court's decision with regard to the Affordable Care Act. She's written very much about how Catholic judges need to follow Catholic dogma and ideology. She's as far right as you're going to get. She's out there with Thomas and Alito. Judge Barbara Lagoa from the United States Court of Appeals from the 11th Circuit in Florida. She'd been a judge less, but she was the leader of the Federalist Society in Florida before President Trump put her on the 11th Circuit, and the governor of Florida put her on the Florida Supreme Court. By all accounts, extremely conservative. And there's Allison Jones Rushing, 39 years old, a judge on the 4th Circuit. Allison was my student when I taught at Duke Law School. Brilliant woman, very personable, but like the other 2, as far right as you get. So no longer is there going to be
You just got muted.
anything. Not sure when it happened, but political scientists like to talk about the median justice in terms of the ideology of the court. Last year it was John Roberts. 2 years ago it was Anthony Kennedy. But now there is no median justice ideologically. It's going to be 5 very conservative justices: Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and the Trump appointee. This will be as conservative Supreme Court as has existed at any point in American history. How did we get here? Well, some of it is simply historical accident in terms of when vacancies occur. Since 1960, So we're dealing the last 60 years. There have been 28 years with a Democratic president and 32 years with a Republican president. That's pretty close. You can't be more even than that. It's going to be 32-28 if it's going to be even either way. Democratic presidents have appointed 8 justices to the Supreme Court during this time. Republican justices, counting the appointment to come on Saturday, will have appointed 15 justices to the Supreme Court. So Republicans will have appointed twice as many almost as Democrats, even though Democrats and Republicans have occupied the White House about the same amount of time. A lot of that is just the accident when vacancies have occurred. For example, Richard Nixon got to fill 4 seats on the Supreme Court in his first 2 years as president. Jimmy Carter had no vacancies on the Supreme Court to fill during his entire time as presidency. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama each served 8 years as president, but had only 2 seats to fill on the Supreme Court apiece. Donald Trump has been president for just under 4 years, and now has his 3rd seat to fill on the Supreme Court. But it's not only about the accident of history. Some of it is about Republican manipulation of the process. I think we should all be talking about how the Republicans have packed the Supreme Court. Antonin Scalia died in February of 2016. Within a month, President Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, the Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. By all accounts, Garland is impeccably qualified. But Senate Leader Mitch McConnell said, no hearings, no vote. He said, we're in an election year. We should let the people choose the president who's going to pick the Supreme Court justice. There's a wonderful article in today's Los Angeles Times that takes the quotes from Republican senators in 2016 and reprints them. As Republican senator after Republican senator said, we shouldn't fill a Supreme Court vacancy in an election year. We should leave it to whoever wins the popular vote. 24 times in American history, prior to 2016, there have been a vacancy in the last year of a president's term. In 21 of 24, the Senate confirmed. In 3, the Senate denied confirmation. Never before had the Senate said, no hearings, no vote. And instead of having that seat filled by Merrick Garland, a moderate Democrat, instead it was filled by Neil Gorsuch, a very conservative Republican. So when I learned of Justice Ginsburg's passing last Friday, just on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, I immediately thought, will the Republicans be true to what they said in 2016? Will they show even a little bit of shame on this? And the answer was, by the time I got done with Rosh Hashanah services, there was already Mitch McConnell on the news saying, we're going forward and filling the vacancy. I thought maybe, just maybe, there might be 4 Republicans who would say, we can't be that much of hypocrites. But by Tuesday, enough Republicans have lined up that it's a foregone conclusion that whoever President Trump picks, no matter how far right, is going to get confirmed. And the result is 6 very conservative justices. And then we'll have 3 liberal justices. But Roberts becomes irrelevant. Roberts can't any longer create a majority by joining with the liberal justices. So that's how we got here. Now let me talk about second. What does it mean? Well, it means there's going to be a very conservative court for a long time to come. Consider the ages of the conservative justices. Clarence Thomas is 72 years old. He's been on the court since 1991, but he was only 43 years old when he was nominated for the Supreme Court. Sam Alito is 70. John Roberts is 65. Brett Kavanaugh is 54. Neil Gorsuch is 52. What about the 3 women on the short list for President Trump? Mentioned Allison Jones Rushing is 39. Amy Coney Barrett, who's thought of as the favorite, is 48. And Barbara Lagoa is 52. John Paul Stevens was on the court until he resigned at age 90. Ruth Bader Ginsburg just passed away at age 87. If these 5 justices remain until, or these 6 justices, until Clarence Thomas turns, say, 87, we've had 15 years of these justices being there. If he stays till he's 90, we have 17 years. And of course, even if he'd leave the court, there would still be 5 conservative justices for a long time to come without him. So this isn't going to change. It is not going to change anytime soon. It's hard for me to not constantly think about how different it could have been, and constantly think if only Hillary Clinton had replaced Scalia and Kennedy and Ginsburg, we could have a progressive court for years to come. But that's not the reality. That's not how it turned out. So what does it mean in terms of specifics? Well, let me go through some of the issues and tell you what to expect. Let me start with abortion. Roe versus Wade is going to be overruled. I have no doubt, not the slightest doubt, that that's what's going to happen. Going into this year, I would have said, there's 4 justices who want to overrule Roe versus Wade: Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. That I think Chief Justice Roberts is going to generally vote to uphold restrictions on abortion, but not that would eliminate the right of women to have abortions. And then there were 4 justices, Ginsburg, Browder, and Kagan, who would certainly reaffirm the right to abortion. Now, whether it's Amy Coney Barrett or Allison Jones Rushing or Barbara Lagoa, there's a 5th justice to overrule Roe versus Wade. Republicans have wanted for decades, conservatives have urged for decades, the overruling of Roe versus Wade. And now they have the votes to do it. I think it'll happen pretty soon, in the next 2 to 3 years. What the Supreme Court will say is, the Constitution is silent about abortion, that this is left to the states to regulate. Some states already have laws on the books that prohibit all abortions. Alabama does. Ohio and Iowa have laws that say that no abortions after a fetal heartbeat can be detected, which is the 6th week of pregnancy, which effectively prohibits so many abortions. Some states have laws that say if Roe is overruled, our law will immediately prohibit abortion. Michigan has such a law that's there. I estimate that about half the states will prohibit all abortions when Roe versus Wade gets overruled. Now, in California, in New York, in Illinois, abortion will remain legal. And women who have money to travel in the states where abortion is illegal can come to the places where it's allowed. Before New York became the first state in this country to legalize abortion in the 1960s, 25% of all the abortions in England were performed on American women. It wasn't poor women going to England for abortions. The reality is that it's poor women, and especially teenagers, who are going to have to choose between the unwanted pregnancy and the cheap, unsafe back alley abortion. We will go back to the time as it was before 1973, a time that many of you that I can remember. Now, it's possible sometime in the future, the court might go further and say the Constitution prohibits all abortions, that personhood begins at conception, and therefore any state allowing abortions is violating the Constitution. After all, there are going to be 6 Catholic justices on the Supreme Court. Roberts is Catholic, Thomas is Catholic, Alito is Catholic, Gorsuch was born Catholic, practices Episcopalian, Kavanaugh is Catholic, and both Amy Coney Barrett and Barbara Lagoa are Catholic. Would they say sometime in the future the Constitution forbids all abortion? It's possible. I don't think so in the short term. Is it possible that if, again, someday there's a Republican president, Republican Congress, they could try to pass a federal statute outlawing all abortion? I think it's possible. But I think in the short term, the court's just going to overrule Roe versus Wade. A second area we're going to see a real change in the law is with regard to affirmative action. You're going to talk, one of your meetings I heard, about the initiative to repeal Proposition 209. Under current federal law, affirmative action is allowed so long as the government can show a compelling reason and there's no other way to achieve it. So colleges and universities can engage in affirmative action to ensure a diverse student body, so long as they just use race as one factor among admissions decisions. That's not allowed in California because of Proposition 209 that says no preference can be given on the basis of race in education or employment or contracting. I think without doubt the Supreme Court is going to overrule the cases that allow affirmative action. And the Supreme Court is going to say equal protection prohibits affirmative action. So there's going to be the sad irony, California voters will repeal 209, and then the Supreme Court will do exactly the same thing as 209 by the way it interprets equal protection of the Constitution. What about the Affordable Care Act? It's estimated the Affordable Care Act has provided but 25 million people health insurance who otherwise wouldn't have had it. The Supreme Court in 2012 upheld the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. There's a case called National Federation of Business for Civilians. As I alluded to earlier, Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion, joined by Ginsburg, Brierson, and Kagan. There is a case before the Supreme Court this fall, could be argued the week after the election. It's called California versus Texas. I have to confess, I just like the name of the case. To say California versus Texas is so evocative at this moment in history. And the issue is whether the Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional. I think the argument before the Supreme Court is a very weak, even frivolous argument that's unconstitutional. But remember, it was 5-4 previously. Amy Coney Barrett published a law review article just a couple of years ago saying the Supreme Court was wrong in that case. There well could be 5 votes to declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional as soon as November. It's hard for me to believe that the Supreme Court, in the midst of a pandemic, the worst public health crisis in over a century, would strike down a law that provides health insurance to over 25 million people. But conservatives have opposed the Affordable Care Act from the very beginning, and now they may have the votes to invalidate it. Religion. I think we are going to see a dramatic shift in the law with regard to religion. In 1947, all 9 justices said, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment can be best understood as creating a wall that separates church and state. That's not the words of liberal law professors or liberal justices. Those are the words of Thomas Jefferson. There should be a wall that separates church and state. And in accord with this, the Supreme Court has limited prayer in public schools, limited religious symbols on government property, limited government aid to religious schools. But now there are going to be 6 justices on the court who reject and vehemently reject the idea of a wall separating church and state. They think we should accommodate religion into government. Their view is the government violates the Establishment Clause only if it coerces religious behavior. For them, religious symbols on government property, nativity scenes and the like, are always okay. For them, prayer at government events, even quite religious prayer, is permissible. For them, not only can the government give aid to religious schools, but it must do so. And with regard to free exercise of religion, the Supreme Court in 1990, in an opinion by Justice Scalia, said, we don't give a religious exception to general laws based on the Constitution. But now we're going to see the court doing that. They did it this past June where they said that lay teachers at religious schools can't sue for employment discrimination based on disability or age or race or sex or religion or sexual orientation. That a religious school now is just completely exempt from employment discrimination law. But I think what the court's going to soon say is that businesses can discriminate against gays and lesbians if it's part of the business owner's religious beliefs. I didn't know if there were 5 votes for that previously, but with the new justice, there are definitely 5 votes for it. I have sketched just a few areas, and to me, it's chilling how much we're going to be losing our liberty, how much we're going to regress with regard to equality because of the Supreme Court. What can Democrats do about it? The third question that I posed. There's nothing they can do to keep the Senate from approving Trump's nominee for the Ginsburg seat. There used to be the filibuster, but when Barack Obama was president, the Republicans were filibustering his nominations to the Federal Court of Appeals, and the Democrats changed Senate rules to eliminate the filibuster for Federal Court of Appeals, Federal District Court, and cabinet nominations. Then, when Neil Gorsuch was nominated, the Democrats filibustered his nomination. The Republicans eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations. So, the Republicans have 53 votes in the Senate. Even if we're a 50-50 tie, the vice president could break the tie. So it would take 4 Republicans to vote against the Trump nomination. I could count to maybe 2, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. And now Lisa Murkowski seems to be backing away from her initial position. The Republicans are in lockstep, and they're going to confirm Trump's nominee and do it quickly. Well, what can the Democrats do? I wrote an op-ed in last Sunday's Los Angeles Times where I argued if the Republicans were to confirm the Trump nominee, the Democrats, if Biden wins and the Democrats take the Senate, should expand the size of the Supreme Court to 13. The number of seats on the Supreme Court is not set by the Constitution. It's set by a statute. It's ranged from 5 to 10 over the course of American history. It started as 5, and then the number increased as the size of the country increased, got to 10. Hard for us to imagine that they wanted 10 justices, an even number. And then in the late 1860s, there's a terribly unpopular president, Andrew Johnson, and Congress didn't want Johnson to fill a vacancy on the Supreme Court. So Congress said the next time there's a vacancy, we're going to just eliminate that seat and go to 9 justices. It's been 9 ever since. Historical accident. I think that the Democrats need to say what the Republicans have done is court packing, that there must be a remedy for it. And since 2 seats were stolen by the Republicans, the appropriate thing to do is to create the number of seats necessary to overcome that and make it 13. Or it could be 11, though then you still have a 6-5 conservative majority. I realize that the disadvantage of this is that the Democrats can do it now, the Republicans can do it in the future. If the Democrats can increase it to 11 or 13, when there's a Republican president, Republican Congress, they can make it 15 or 17. On the other hand, I don't believe in unilateral disarmament. And if the Democrats don't do this, then there's really nothing that they can do. And then the Supreme Court is gone, not just for my and our lifetime, but for decades to come. I favor term limits for Supreme Court justices. I favor 18-year non-renewable terms. Life expectancy, thankfully, is so much longer now than it was in 1787. It was 36 years old. 36 was the life expectancy in 1787. As I said, Clarence Thomas was confirmed in 1991. If he remains on the court until he's 90, he'll be a justice for 47 years. Elena Kagan and John Roberts were 50 when they confirmed. If they remain on the court till they're 90, that's 40 years. That's too much power in one person's hands for too long a period of time. But I think term limits would take a Supreme Court amendment. And I don't know that there's any constituency that cares enough to do the hard work to get an amendment passed. The options for Democrats are limited. It means we're going to have to turn ever more to state Supreme Courts to protect rights under state constitutions. We're going to have to turn ever more to the political process, to Congress, state legislatures, to city councils to protect our rights. We're not going to be able to assume that there's a judiciary there that's going to expand freedom or enhance equality. What the Supreme Court does affects all of us. Often the most important, the most intimate aspects of our lives. And I never thought we'd come to a point we'd have a president who would say, I might not leave office and have an orderly transfer of power even if I lose. I never thought we'd come to a point of a Supreme Court as conservative, the one we're going to have very soon. I promised to talk for 40 minutes, to take 20 minutes to leave 20 minutes of questions, and I run on schedule.
Seems like you've only spoken 30 minutes.
When I started at 10 after, I said I would talk 30 minutes and then take 20 minutes of questions.
No, it was so enlightening. It just seemed less time because I want more, but anyway.
Let's, are there questions for me in the chat? I see some. Let me answer the first question I see is directed to me. Will the High Court be successful in striking down the Affordable Care Act? Let me talk about California versus Texas. In 2012, when the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, the issue was whether the individual mandate was constitutional. The individual mandate was the provision that said everybody had to purchase insurance or pay a tax penalty by 2016. In December 2017, Congress, as part of the tax reform bill, eliminated any enforcement of the individual mandate. State of Texas brought an argument and said, well, the Supreme Court in 2012 said the individual mandate is the key to the Affordable Care Act. The individual mandate doesn't have any enforcement procedure. Therefore, the whole Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional. The therefore doesn't follow in that sentence. If a court strikes down a part of a law, the question is always, well, would Congress have adopted the rest of the law without that part? Here it's Congress that repealed a part of the law, but Congress left the rest of the law intact. In fact, Congress even voted in December 2017 not to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Is there any question as to congressional intent? That's why I think the argument that it's unconstitutional is just frivolous. But, of course, conservatives have always opposed the Affordable Care Act, and they may have 5 votes to strike it down. I just find it, as I said to you, so hard to imagine that the conservatives want to strike down the Affordable Care Act, which provides 25 million people health insurance in the midst of a pandemic. What are the chances the Democrats will be able to expand the number of justices or put a forced retirement age? I don't think they can create a forced retirement age without amending the Constitution, because the Constitution says that just the Supreme Court and the inferior courts have their positions assuming good behavior, life tenure. Could there be the term limits by constitutional amendment or even retirement age by constitutional amendment? Yes, but amending the Constitution is really difficult, and it takes a constituency to really fight hard to make it happen. And I don't know that's going to exist here. Will the Supreme Court nominee help or hurt his re-election chances? I don't know. I'm a law professor. I'm very comfortable talking with you about the cases and the court. I'm not a political scientist. I worry that Justice Ginsburg's death is going to help President Trump in all sorts of ways. The headlines are dominated by Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, not the 200,000 deaths in the pandemic, not the depression that we're in economically. I think that the Supreme Court is really something that appeals to President Trump's base. If I were President Trump, what I would say to the electorate is, I think we should wait till the presidential election. If I win in November, then I'll nominate the justice and I want Senate to confirm it right away. So go out and vote for me right now. That's not what Trump is saying. I worry that this is all letting President Trump seem presidential, doing what presidents do, picking a Supreme Court justice. On the other hand, in my dreams, this is mobilizing Democrats to say, we just can't let this continue to happen. Let's see. I have a question too. Can I ask or should I type it? You can ask it, whatever you want.
I typed it. It's in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
A lot of people say we shouldn't monkey around with tradition. Harry Reid getting rid of the filibuster fired big time. Should we not add to the number of Supreme Court justices? What do you say to that? Is the area a lost cause for another generation? Let me take them one at a time. Imagine the Democrats hadn't eliminated the filibuster for Court of Appeals and district court nominations. And imagine then that the Democrats tried to filibuster Neil Gorsuch. I believed with certainty that the Republicans would have eliminated the filibuster at that moment in time. It wasn't Harry Reid monkeying away around with the process. There had been threats to eliminate the filibuster for years. It was just who was going to want something enough to do it. So I don't think that any chance that the Republicans weren't going to confirm Gorsuch by eliminating the filibuster. Is there a danger in expanding the size of the Supreme Court? Sure there is. It takes our politically divided country and it furthers the divide. It opens the door to further expansion of the court. And yet, what I keep asking people who say that is, and what's your alternative other than letting the court stay in very conservative hands for decades to come? Is there any truth to the, I skipped, is the ERA a lost cause for another generation now? I don't think so, but it's complicated. In January of this year, which seems like light years ago, I think this year has to be measured in dog years, Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. 5 states have rescinded their ratification. I think there's a strong argument that it's up to Congress. And if Congress passes a resolution saying the ERA is part of the Constitution, that should end it. And if there's a Democratic Congress, they can do so. In theory, the Supreme Court could strike that down, but there's a precedent from 1939, Coleman versus Miller, that says it's up to Congress whether an amendment has been properly ratified. Now, if Congress doesn't do that, or if the court says Congress can't do that, then we have to start all over again. But I'm still hopeful that maybe a Democratic Congress would say, we deem the ERA to be part of the Constitution. Is there any truth that Chief Justice can hold off the installation of a Trump nominee? No, and Chief Justice Roberts wouldn't want to. Swearing somebody in is a tradition. It's not a requirement with regard to the Supreme Court. Roberts isn't going to do that to a new colleague. You know, this is somebody who's going to serve on the Supreme Court with for 20 or 25 years. He'll swear in whoever the nominee is as soon as the Senate confirms. Is it conceivable the Supreme Court would work to help Trump keep power even if he loses the vote? Sure, it's conceivable. Think of Bush versus Gore. It's hard to know what's going to happen in November. There's a terrific article in this week's edition of the New York Review of Books by Stanford professor Pamela Karlan, titled, I think, Will He Leave? I read a great article, a chilling article just last night in The Atlantic by Gelman that spins out various scenarios of what might happen. Maybe Joe Biden will win decisively and the Electoral College will say he's the winner and Trump will decide to leave office. Maybe Joe Biden will win and the Electoral College will say that and Trump will say, I believe it's all a voter fraud. I'm not leaving. And then we'll need the Supreme Court to say, you have to go. And what if the Supreme Court doesn't say that? We've then become what so many countries in the world have throughout world history. What if there's states that are very close and there's contested elections and they end up going to the Supreme Court like Bush versus Gore? Bush versus Gore had the 5 most conservative Republican justices in favor of Bush. The other 4 just went for Gore. Will we see that again? You know, and then there's the scenarios that say it may come down to if Trump won't leave, who does the military back? What happens with people taking the streets? The left, the armed right-wing militias? All of this is so frightening. I never thought we would be having such a conversation in the United States in my lifetime. And yet, I don't think any of us can imagine where we will be 6 weeks from today on Thursday, November 5th. Okay, more questions. Can Trump change the electors for each state to only allow electors who vote for him? Some rates are telling us. No, Trump can't. States conceivably could, and here's how. Each state sends its electors to Electoral College. The Constitution says each state chooses the manner of selecting its electors. In the early 19th century, some states had state legislatures choosing the electors. Well, could it be, imagine a state that is a Republican legislature, that Biden wins the popular vote, but the state legislature says, we're directing that our electors all vote for Donald Trump. The Constitution would seemingly allow that. Trump can't do that, but the state legislature could do that. And then we're back to the nightmare scenario that I thought would never happen. Then what we're going to be seeing is people taking to the streets. And my only hope is no Republican legislature would actually do that. Other questions?
I have a question about the, who is the candidate in Florida?
Kanye West?
No, as a potential Supreme Court nominee.
Oh, Barbara Lagoa.
Barbara Lagoa. I read that, and I don't know if it's true, but I read that she might have something bad in some of the cases in which there was a child pornographer, and the child pornographer was brought to trial. He wanted to, be his own lawyer. The judge refused, and so he was sentenced, and now as a court justice, I don't know what it's called, but she overruled that. Would that be effective in preventing her from being?
Nothing's going to be effective. The Republicans in the Senate are going to vote to confirm her. I'm toying with the idea of writing an op-ed saying the Democrats shouldn't even show up to the hearings. What's the point? We know what the result is going to be. Why participate in what's a charade? But unless you can persuade 4 Republicans that that's enough, she gets confirmed. And I don't see how who are the 4 Republicans? Gosh, there was overwhelming evidence that Brett Kavanaugh engaged in sexual assault against Christine Blasey Ford. We all listened to Christine Blasey Ford testify. And yet still, there was only 1 Republican who was willing to come out with that as the evidence. I just don't see any way we're going to stop Barbara Lagoa or Amy Coney Barrett.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so what I understand is once the Electoral College certifies, let's say they certified Biden as the winner, Trump can't do anything about that. I mean, even if he stays in the White House, Biden would still be recognized as the president, even if he had to, the expression is, had to govern from Motel 6.
That's absolutely right, that if the Electoral College deems Joe Biden to be president, he's president. And I would hope at that point the Supreme Court would say, that's the process. And what Biden has said in the last couple of days, which is right, is, well, if I win and Trump stays, we know how to escort trespassers out of the White House. I hope it doesn't come to this, where Trump says, I declare myself to be the president. And Trump's comment yesterday where he said, will you agree to an orderly transfer of power? And he said, no. I said, I want to see what the results are. There's so much voter fraud out there. But you're absolutely right. If the Electoral College deems Biden the winner, Biden is the president of the United States under the Constitution. And hopefully everyone in the country, including the courts and the military, will respect that. But you're absolutely right. Has there ever been justice flipped against their president or appointing them? Yeah, it doesn't happen very much. Harry Blackmun was nominated by President Nixon. Blackmun was very conservative when he started on the court. By the time he left, he was the most liberal justice. Felix Frankfurter was thought to be a liberal when he was nominated by President Franklin Roosevelt. By the time he left the court in 1962, he was the most conservative justice. But those are the exceptions. Oh, there have been instances where no one knew. When David Souter got picked by President George H.W. Bush, no one knew anything about him, and he turned out to be much more liberal than anybody expected. But the reality, as we all know, is rarely do people have major ideological shifts when they're 50s and their 60s. People are who they are. Scalia was just as conservative the day he passed away as the day he went on the court. Ginsburg was liberal the day she passed away as the day she went on the court. Clarence Thomas is conservative now as he went on the court in 1991. And there's much more care now in ideological vetting than there used to be because they don't want any more surprises. Why not show up with the nominee on the record if something may help explain why the court should be expanded? They could, but if I were the Democrats, I wonder why. She's not going to say anything. The nominees never say anything. It's a charade. I testified against Sam Alito in 2006 at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. And there was a break, and Joe Biden, who was on the Judiciary Committee, walked up to me. He just wanted somebody to talk to. And I was standing there. And he said, you know, this is all an exercise in kabuki theater. He said, we all know that Sam Alito is going to be conservative. The Republicans are pretending he has no ideology. And the Democrats are trying to pin him down, and he's too smart for that. I think that's absolutely right. What are the reasons not to offer Trump immunity from his crimes and let him go to Moscow? If he'd take it. It reminds me in the early, not long after, on the eve of the Iraqi war, I wrote an op-ed in the LA Times, and in hindsight, surprised about saying, we should offer Saddam Hussein $10 million and lifetime security if only he'll just leave office. I said, this war is going to cost us so much in money and human lives. Just bribe him to leave. Say, you have a choice. Take our $10 million and protection, or we're going to have a military action to overthrow you. Your choice. I know it sounded silly to people at the time. I remember my oldest son was furious at me and said, that's so ridiculous. But I really believe I was right. We've spent, what, $1 trillion in Iraq? For 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, we could have had him just leave office and provide him protection in some castle somewhere. More likely Trump will declare voter fraud and try to invalidate the results if he loses. Trump's not one to concede. I think that it's so important that it be decisive. I think if it's close, he's going to proclaim himself the winner. And again, all of this will be something we've never seen before. The political climate reminds me way too much of the beginnings of Nazi Germany. What do you think? There have been a lot of people who have written about this. There's a wonderful book by Bert Newborn, a professor at NYU Law School, called When the Mob is Swayed. And it has a whole chapter that details the parallels what went on in Nazi Germany and what went on here. Cass Sunstein has an article in the last issue of New York Review of Books talking about this. I have faith in the American institutions of government. I have faith that if President Trump tries to do this, the Supreme Court and the military will stand up to him. But I said a couple of times, I never imagined we'd be having this conversation. I know I'm out of time, so maybe the thing I can conclude by saying is no form of government, including no democracy, lasts forever. Democracies are there until they're not. I've often wondered in the last weeks and months, how did the successful Germans in 1935 or 1933 look at what was happening? And are we in that situation? Or those who live in other countries that have had democracies and then went to fascist regimes? I'm not saying it's going to happen now, but I'm more worried about it now and more worried about what's going to happen after this election than ever before. So it's incumbent on all of us to get out as many people as we can to vote on November 3rd, to make this election as clear and decisive as possible. That's the way we can save democracy.
Thank
With
you.
that, I'll say thank you for having me.
Thank
Excellent
you.
job.
Yes, thank you, Professor Chemerinsky. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Depressing, but great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very timely.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Richard or I about the signs or how to get involved with helping to get the vote out?
I think we need to do more, all of us.
Brody, I'm texting and phoning and postcards. Where do we get the signs? I'd like to get a Biden sign and also that wonderful colored sign. I can't remember what it says. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anyone?
No. Richard,
No.
you answer her, please.
I have the signs at my house, the Biden-Harris lawn signs and some window signs as well.
Okay, what's your address?
It's in the chat, but it's 18 Chaparral Court, Ramon, at the Greystone Ranch off San Ramon Valley Boulevard.
18 Chaparral Court, San
Right.
Ramon. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, in chat, he has his phone number and his email address
Yeah.
and his address. If
Oh,
you-
I see.
It says
In
contact
chat?
Rick Adler if you want a Biden-Harris lawn sign.
I don't see
Rick,
the chat anymore.
Rick,
We're also going to be at the Danville Farmers Market on Saturday.
Okay.
Rick, would you be the one to contact? I'd like to volunteer to send out postcards to potential Biden voters.
Yeah, I'm not handling that part, but there are those that you could contact. I'm not even sure who to suggest at this point.
Yeah, Art, if you look in my SRVDC emails, there's lots of opportunities to send out postcards. One of them is called Vote Forward, and then another one called Reclaim Our Vote. And they're both those, the contact information is in my email. I'll send it to you personally too. Do I have your email address, Art? Could you
It's,
type,
Yeah,
could you type your email address in there and I'll be sure and send it to you then?
you want it in the chat window?
Sure, yes.
Okay, sure.
I'd like to put in a plug for Vote Forward. Sending postcards to California voters is not going to do much good. Vote Forward has identified the important swing states, and it's identified voters who don't vote very often specifically. And there is a letter, and you write your name and about 3 sentences of why you vote, and you sign your name. And it takes a little bit of effort, but I'm doing it. I've done about, I don't know, 1,000 now. And there's about another month. They're looking at the date, the optimum date that they should be sent. Because if it's too soon, it doesn't do any good. And with the controversy over the post office, they're doing some research to maybe change the date, and the present date is October 26th, so it's about a week before the election. Most likely that'll be changed. But again, it's just voteforward.org.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Flip Blue, I'm doing the postcards through them. Now, they are anxious to get the postcards out as soon as possible because they're concerned about not putting too much in the mail close to the election. So you could check Flip Blue too.
Okay, yeah. Well, they want people to vote early too, right?
Yeah. I have to leave. Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much. This is really enlightening.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Does anyone else
It was
have
a very,
It was wonderful, but terribly depressing.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Very.
certainly is.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Good luck.
Thank you.
everyone for coming? I hope you can come to our opposition meeting on October 7th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.